welcome back to Homecooked History, the show where we try to recreate historic recipes in today's casual kitchen. My name is Megan, and I am not a professional chef, and this is not a restaurant kitchen. I'm actually a historian, and this is my personal kitchen inside of my house. Today is actually the last episode of our first season of Homecooked History, so we wanted to go out with a bang. We've covered the dishes of New England and recipes from the Upper South and the Deep South, so today we thought that we would highlight a different region of the United States, the Midwest. The recipe that we'll be tackling today? Oxtail soup. Today's recipe for oxtail soup comes out of the Settlement Cookbook, compiled by Mrs. Simon Cantor, and the 7th edition, which is the one that we're using, was published in 1915 out of Wisconsin. So these recipes refer to settler or frontier recipes or interpretations of them during the early 20th century. But it's interesting to note that oxtail soup actually has variations all over the world, including French origins, English origins, and Asian origins as well. So we see different variations of this dish across the globe and across time, so it's a lot more popular than people probably realize. The recipe that we're using today comes from a Midwest cookbook, but it's important to realize that oxtail soup was actually consumed all throughout the country. For instance, in the American Matron, or Practical and Scientific Cookery, a 1851 cookbook out of Boston, we see another recipe for oxtail soup, which is slightly varied but very much similar to the Midwest recipe that we're using. Oxtail isn't an ingredient that many of us are familiar with in our cooking, but it actually was a very popular choice of meat throughout American history. One cookbook entitled Buckeye Cookery and Practical Housekeeping, which was published in 1877 out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, claimed that, quote, ox beef is the sweetest and most juicy and the most economical. So we see this emphasis on not only taste, but also accessibility and affordability, which is one of the reasons that it was so popular throughout the 19th century. We're going to start by heating up 2 tablespoons of our butter on medium heat in our stock pot on the stove. The European roots of oxtail soup can be traced back to France. In that country, the dish was referred to as au chaput, which means shaken pot, right, or a mixed jumbled pot. When William the Conqueror invaded England in 1066, his soldiers brought the dish with them, and it was introduced into the English diet as well as the English vocabulary. And because of changes in pronunciations and in spelling, we see the emergence of hodgepodge, which is how the English eventually referred to the dish. Hodgepodge obviously means a mixture or a jumbling of items, and so again, the shaken pot medley understanding of oxtail soup as being mainly a meat and veggie dish with whatever vegetables that you have that are accessible. It's also referred to as hot pot in England. And eventually, those French and English settlers brought the dish with them when they colonized the Americas. And so we see it referred to by a variety of different names, but really interesting to see the changing language with the dish, even though the initial recipe pretty much remained intact. Okay, now we're going to add our oxtails into our heated butter inside of the pot. Aside from the Midwest and the Northeast, we also see oxtails used in classic American soul food recipes. So oxtails, meaning beef or veal tails, would normally be braised and prepared in some sort of gravy dish or as part of a stew. And typically, most of the variations that we see throughout U.S. history include some sort of a medley of vegetables that accompany the oxtail. So it really is kind of like the original beef and veggie combination. But its presence in African American cuisine as well as Caribbean cuisine should not go unappreciated. Time to add our ground beef into the pot. Add in 6 quarts of water to your stock pot. Kinda looks a little bit like meat water, but that's alright. Now we're going to add a tablespoon of salt to the mixture. In addition to European and American versions of oxtail soup, we also see the presence of a similar dish throughout the Asian world. In particular, you've got the much beloved Indonesian version referred to as sop bontut. And it's like its counterparts in terms of having this stewed or soupy aspect. You've got the oxtail that's been diced up and that includes the bone. You also have the presence of chopped carrots, celery, and potato, but with signature Asian spices like coriander, ginger, lime, and chilies. And you also have a different spice component, so nutmeg, clove, and cinnamon is going to be more prevalent in those renderings. So just really interesting to see how, despite having the similar main ingredients, the flavor profiles of these dishes can be very different depending on what part of the world you're in. So that's it for now. We're going to let our meat cook for a couple of hours, and then we'll return in a little bit and add the vegetables. For many of us, when we think of oxen, we automatically think of the Oregon Trail. And no, I am not referring to the incredible 1990s computer game. I'm actually referring to the path that thousands of settlers took in order to reach the West Coast. After the Louisiana Purchase of the early 1800s, the land size of the U.S. approximately doubled, and thousands of settlers left from Missouri, which